I was 63 years old, and I had spent the last 6 months learning how to be alone. That might not sound like much to someone who has never lost a husband, but when you share a bed with the same man for 41 years, his absence doesn't just leave silence. It leaves a shape, a weight that presses into the mattress beside you every night, reminding you that something used to be there, something warm and real, and now it isn't. Richard died in a car accident on a Tuesday evening in October. At least that's what they told me. The police called a little past 9. I was watching a cooking show I didn't care about, waiting for him to come home from a business trip. The officer's voice was calm, practiced. There had been a collision on the highway. The vehicle caught fire. They were sorry. They were deeply sorry. I don't remember falling, but Jack told me later he found me on the kitchen floor when he arrived, the phone still pressed to my face, the screen dark. The funeral was 5 days later, closed casket. They said the damage was too severe, that it would be kinder not to look. I trusted them. Why wouldn't I? These were professionals. These were people who dealt with death every day, and Jack stood beside me the entire time, his arm around my shoulders, whispering that everything was going to be okay. I believed him too. 6 months passed. I survived them the way old women survive winters. Slowly, stubbornly, with no particular plan. I stopped cooking meals for 2. I stopped setting his place at the table. I donated most of his clothes but kept one flannel shirt that still carried his smell, cedar and cheap aftershave. I wore it to bed some nights. I'm not ashamed of that. On a Thursday morning in April, I drove to the grocery store because grief does not excuse an empty refrigerator. I remember the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the squeak of cartwheels on tile, the faint music playing from somewhere in the ceiling. I was standing in the canned goods aisle, reaching for a jar of tomato sauce when I heard it. A cough, soft, short, followed by a muttered complaint about prices. My hand froze mid-air. That cough was not a stranger's cough. That cough had lived in my kitchen for 4 decades. It came with the rustle of newspaper pages and the scrape of a chair being pushed back from the table. I had heard it 10,000 mornings. I had heard it in hospitals, in hotels, in the passenger seat of every car we ever owned. I knew that sound the way I knew my own heartbeat. I turned slowly. He was standing 3 shelves down, holding a basket, comparing labels the way he always did, tilting the can toward the light, squinting at the small print. Broad shoulders, slightly hunched now, silver hair that refused to lie flat. The same posture, the same unhurried way of moving through a store, as if time owed him something. The jar slipped from my fingers. It hit the floor and shattered, red sauce splattering across white tile. People gasped. Someone asked if I was okay. I didn't answer. My feet were already moving. "Richard," I said. My voice cracked in the middle of his name, splitting it into something raw and desperate. "Richard, it's me." He turned. For one terrible second, I expected his face to light up the way it always did when he saw me across a room. That slow smile, the one that still made me feel like I was the only person worth looking at. Instead, I saw confusion. Real confusion. The kind you can't fake. "I'm sorry," he said carefully, like he was speaking to someone lost. "I think you have me mistaken for someone else." Those words hit harder than the sight of him. Mistaken. As if 41 years of marriage could be mistaken. As if I hadn't memorized every line of that face in the dark, tracing it with my fingers on nights when sleep wouldn't come. "No," I whispered. "No, Richard. It's me. Margaret. Your wife." He stepped back. That single movement hurt more than anything. Richard never stepped away from me. Not once. Not even during our worst fights. The ones that lasted 3 days and ended with him bringing me coffee without saying a word. "My name is Daniel," he said. "James Carter. I don't know you. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and found the photo from his last birthday. Us on the porch, his arm around me, the sun catching the gray in his stubble. He had burned the steaks that night and blamed the grill, and I had laughed so hard I spilled wine on my dress. I held it up between us. Look at this, I said. Do you remember this day? You burned the steaks and blamed the grill. He glanced at the screen. Something moved behind his eyes, quick and guarded. A tightening in his jaw that lasted half a second. Then he shook his head. I've never seen that photo before, he said. You must be going through something very difficult. He placed a hand on my shoulder. That touch nearly broke me. It was his hand. The same warmth, the same weight, landing in the exact spot he always touched when he wanted to calm me down, right where my neck met my shoulder. 41 years of muscle memory don't lie. Show me your fingers, I said suddenly. He frowned but lifted his hand. There it was, the crooked pinky, bent slightly inward, the one he broke at 15 fixing his mother's roof, the one I used to wrap my own fingers around when we held hands, the one no stranger, no look-alike, no twin could possibly share. My stomach dropped. I have to go now, he said quickly, already pulling his cart away. I truly hope you feel better. He walked toward the checkout. I stood there shaking while an employee knelt beside me, sweeping up broken glass. People avoided my eyes. Someone whispered, "Poor woman." But I wasn't poor. I was terrified, because the question forming in my chest was louder than any grief I had ever felt. If my husband was alive, then who was buried in his grave? I should have left the store. I should have gone home and convinced myself that grief had finally cracked something inside me. That would have been easier, cleaner. But my body wouldn't let me leave. I watched him from behind an end cap display as he paid for his groceries. He used cash. I noticed that immediately because Richard always used a card and complained about keeping receipts. This man folded the bills carefully, pressing the edges flat with his thumb. Exactly the way Richard did. When he pushed the cart toward the exit, my feet followed without permission. Outside, the afternoon sun hit my face. He loaded groceries into a white sedan, old paint, dent along the rear door. Not the truck Richard loved and polished every weekend, but the way he arranged the bags was unmistakable. Heavy items first, bread on top, eggs last. I memorized the license plate without deciding to. He pulled out of the lot. I walked to my car, the one Richard had bought me 2 years before the accident. He said he wanted me to have something safe, something reliable. The memory stung now, sharp and specific, like pressing a bruise you forgot you had. I followed him, 3 car lengths back, close enough to keep him in sight, far enough to disappear into traffic. My pulse hammered so loudly I could feel it in my teeth. We passed streets I recognized, then turned into neighborhoods I had never driven through. The houses shrank, paint peeled, fences sagged. He slowed on a quiet street, lined with old trees, and turned into the driveway of a small house painted pale green. He parked, stepped out with the bags, and then the front door opened. A woman appeared, mid-50s, maybe younger than me by a decade. Dark hair pulled back, no makeup, wearing a sweater that looked soft from too many washes. She smiled when she saw him. Not a polite smile, a familiar one. The kind that comes from years of seeing someone walk through the same door. She leaned in and kissed his cheek, took one of the bags from his hands, spoke to him softly, words I couldn't hear but didn't need to. Then 2 children burst through the doorway, a boy and a girl, maybe 8 and 10. They ran straight for him with their arms wide open. "Grandpa," the girl shouted. "Did you bring the ice cream?" He laughed. That laugh, lopsided and warm, starting in his chest and rolling out slowly. The laugh I heard in our kitchen for decades. The laugh that used to make me smile even when I was angry at him. The laugh I thought I would never hear again. He crouched down and let them climb onto him, balancing grocery bags with the ease of someone who had done this many times before. The woman watched from the doorway, her hand resting on his back. They went inside together. The door closed. I sat frozen in my car, hands locked on the steering wheel, the engine still running. Sunlight warmed my face through the windshield. Only then did I realize I was crying. Not sobbing, not gasping, just steady, silent tears tracking down my cheeks and falling into my lap. 41 years of marriage, 6 months of mourning, nights spent whispering his name into the dark, begging God to let me hear his voice one more time. And here he was, alive, laughing, holding children who were not mine, in a house I had never seen, loved by a woman whose name I didn't know. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. The house, the car, the address number beside the door. My hands shook so badly that half the photos came out blurred, but a few were sharp enough. His profile through the car window, the green paint, the white fence. When the light started to fade, I drove home. I don't remember the route. I only remember sitting in my garage afterward, engine off, staring at my phone, zooming in on his face again and again. Every line matched, every shadow. Inside the house, the silence felt different now. Not empty, hostile. Like the walls knew something I was only beginning to understand. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with a single lamp on, photo albums spread open beside my phone. I moved between them slowly, carefully, zooming in on the photos from that afternoon, then looking down at pictures from our past. Our wedding day, his first gray hairs, a beach trip where his shirt rode up and I had kissed the sunburn on his shoulder. Every detail matched. The scar above his right eyebrow from the ladder fall he laughed about for years. The small mole near his collarbone he hated because it made him self-conscious. The slight unevenness in his ears that only I had ever noticed. These were not things grief invented. These were facts etched into skin and bone. Twins don't share scars. Strangers don't share stories written into flesh. At 3:40 in the morning, I picked up my phone and called my son. It rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, Jack answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Mom, do you know what time it is?" "I need you to come over right now," I said. He paused. "Mom, it's the middle of the night. Did something happen?" "Yes, something happened." A longer pause. I could hear him shifting in bed, the rustle of sheets. "Mom," he said gently, "if this is about Dad again, we talked about this. You've been through a lot. Grief can do strange things." "I saw him yesterday," I said. "I saw your father. Alive." Silence. Then a sharp breath, the kind someone takes when they're trying to stay in control. "Mom, what did you take? Did you miss your medication?" "I followed him home, Jack. I saw where he lives. I saw his family." My voice didn't shake. That seemed to scare him more than anything I had said. "Stay there," he said. "Don't go anywhere. I'm coming." The call ended. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back. Dark circles carved deep beneath my eyes. Hair pulled back without thought. A face that looked 10 years older than it had 6 months ago. I used to be the woman people called put together, polished, composed. Now I looked like someone who had been taken apart, piece by piece, and reassembled wrong. Jack arrived 40 minutes later. He didn't knock. He let himself in with the key he'd had since high school, the one I never asked him to return because some part of me always wanted to believe my son would come home when I needed him. He found me at the kitchen table, surrounded by photos. "Mom," he said softly. "What's going on?" I handed him my phone. I didn't speak. I just watched his face as he scrolled through the pictures. At first there was confusion, squinting, tilting the screen, comparing what he saw with what he expected. Then disbelief. His thumb stopped moving. His lips parted slightly. And then something else crossed his expression, something deeper than surprise. Fear. He swallowed hard and handed the phone back. "He looks like Dad," he said carefully. "But people resemble each other. It happens." "Did you see his hand?" I asked. "The finger." Jack rubbed his face. "Mom, we buried Dad. You were there. I was there. Everyone was there." "A closed casket," I said. He looked away. "They said it was better that way. The accident was bad." "Did you see his body, Jack?" His jaw tightened. The silence between us changed texture. It wasn't the silence of comfort anymore. It was the silence of a door being pressed shut from the other side. "No," he finally said. "I didn't. Neither did I." He stared at the table. I could feel something shifting between us, something that had been solid for 37 years, the entire length of my son's life. I had always believed that whatever else happened in the world, Jack and I were on the same side. "I want to go back there," I said, standing. "I want you to come with me." "Mom, this isn't healthy. Are you coming, or am I going alone?" He hesitated. It lasted only a few seconds, but I felt every one of them. In that pause lived a decision he didn't want to make, and a truth he wasn't ready to face. "Fine," he said. "We'll go. So you can see it's not him. So you can let this go." We drove in silence. I gave directions. Left here. Right at the stop sign. Past the church with the broken steeple. When we turned onto the quiet street with the pale green house, my heart started hammering again. "That's the one," I said. Jack parked a short distance away. We sat there watching. The morning was still early, the street mostly empty. A dog barked somewhere behind a fence. A sprinkler ticked in a nearby yard. After a few minutes, the front door opened. He stepped out. Same broad shoulders, same silver hair, same unhurried walk. He carried a coffee mug in one hand and stood on the porch for a moment, looking at the sky the way Richard used to every morning, like he was checking whether the world had changed overnight. Jack leaned forward in his seat. The color left his face so fast I thought he might be sick. He stared, unblinking, as the man walked to the car, set down the mug on the roof, opened the trunk, retrieved something, and then drove past us without a glance. When I looked at my son, tears were streaming down his cheeks. "Mom," he whispered. In that single word, I heard everything. Not surprise, not denial, not confusion. I heard the sound of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had just watched it slip from his hands before he said another word. I already knew. Whatever truth he had been hiding, it was finally breaking him too. Jack didn't start the car. He sat there gripping the wheel, his forehead pressed against it, his shoulders shaking. I had seen my son cry before, when his first marriage ended, when his childhood dog died on the vet's table. But never like this. This wasn't grief. This was something underneath grief. This was the sound of a lie collapsing. "Mom," he said finally, barely audible. "I'm so sorry." Those two words landed with a weight that made everything before them feel small. Sorry didn't mean sympathy. Sorry meant guilt. Sorry meant he had known. Sorry meant that every time he held my hand at the funeral, every time he told me I'd be okay, every time he checked on me during those long, dark months of mourning, he had been performing. "Tell me," I said. My voice sounded flat, distant, like it belonged to someone sitting in another room. "Tell me right now." He lifted his head. His eyes were red, raw, and filled with something I had never seen in my son before. not sadness. Shame. Dad didn't die in that accident. The words hung between us, heavy and absolute. I didn't scream. I didn't gasp. Some part of me had already crossed into a place beyond shock, a place where the body stops reacting and simply waits for more. "Go on," I said. He took a deep breath, the kind of breath someone takes before jumping. He had another family, Mom, for a long time, over 20 years. That woman you saw, Susan, he lived with her part of the time. He told me it started as a mistake, something that just never ended. 20 years. The number sat inside my skull and burned. 20 years of business trips that lasted too long. 20 years of phone calls he took outside. 20 years of holidays where he arrived late and left early, blaming the marina supply company, blaming traffic, blaming clients. "How long did you know?" I asked. "About 3 years. The air left my lungs. I found out by accident," he continued, his voice shaking. "I was helping him with paperwork from the business. I saw duplicate bills, utilities, insurance, 2 households. I confronted him and he broke down. He begged me not to tell you. The marina supply business. The company Richard built from nothing. The one I had defended to every friend who said he traveled too much. I used to tell them he was building something for our family. I used to say it with pride. And you said nothing," I said. Jack wiped his face with his sleeve. "He said it would destroy you. He said if you found out, you'd take half of everything, the business, the house, everything he built." "Everything we built," I corrected quietly. He nodded, miserable. "6 months ago, he came to me with a plan," Jack said. "He said he wanted to end the double life, be with her full time. But if he divorced you, he'd lose too much. The house, the business equity, retirement accounts. So he decided to disappear." My hands began to shake. I pressed them flat against my knees. "He said it would be easier if you thought he was dead," Jack whispered. "Easier." The word tasted like poison. "Easier for whom?" "For him," Jack said. "And for me." I turned to him sharply. The look in my eyes must have been something terrible because he flinched. "If he died," Jack continued, almost choking on the words, "everything passed to me automatically. The business assets, the accounts. He transferred most of the money to himself first, under a different name. The rest came to me. I thought I could take care of you, give you a monthly amount, make sure you were comfortable, an allowance, like a child, like a stranger being managed." "How did he fake it?" I asked. My voice was calm now, eerily calm, the way water is calm before something very bad rises to the surface. Jack swallowed hard. "There was a man," he said. "A homeless man. Terminally ill. No real family except a niece he barely knew. Dad paid him. Paid the niece too. They staged the accident. Dad used his own documents. The man died in the hospital under Richard's name. The body was badly damaged. The casket stayed closed. The world went still. I remembered the phone call from the police. The officers practiced sympathy. I remembered Jack insisting I shouldn't see the body, telling me it would be too upsetting. Holding my hand at the funeral while I sobbed into his shoulder, and strangers told me how strong I was. "You let me bury a stranger," I said. "Yes." "You let me mourn your father for 6 months." "Yes." "You watched me fall apart. You watched me stop eating. You watched me sit in the dark talking to a dead man who was alive 15 miles away." Jack broke down completely. His whole body folded forward like something inside him had finally snapped. "I didn't know how to stop it once it started," he said. "I thought if enough time passed, you'd heal. I thought it would be kinder this way." Kinder. I let the word sit between us. It tasted worse than any insult I had ever received. "You stole my right to the truth," I said. "You stole my grief and replaced it with a performance. Every tear I cried was based on a lie you helped build. He couldn't look at me. "Take me home," I said. "Mom, we need to talk about this. Take me home." He started the car. Neither of us spoke on the drive back. When he pulled into my driveway, I opened the door and stepped out without looking at him. "Mom, please," he called after me. I walked inside and closed the door behind me. The lock clicked. I stood in the entryway of the house Richard had bought us 30 years ago. The house where I had raised my son, cooked 10,000 dinners, hung Christmas lights every November, planted tomatoes every spring. The house I had believed was the center of a real life. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around at walls covered with framed photos. Our wedding day, Jack as a baby, family trips, holidays. 41 years of evidence that something real had existed here, but it hadn't been real. Not all of it. Maybe not even most of it. I pressed my palms against my eyes until the pressure hurt. I did not cry. I had already used up whatever tears belonged to sadness. What I felt now was something else entirely. Colder, steadier, sharper. Whatever came next would not be forgiveness. Whatever came next would not be silence. For the first time in 41 years of marriage and 6 months of mourning, I was going to choose myself, and they were not going to see it coming. For 3 days, I did nothing. I didn't call Jack back. I didn't answer his texts. I watched him pull into my driveway twice from the upstairs window, sit in his car for 10 minutes, then leave when I didn't open the door. I let the phone ring until it stopped, then ring again. 41 years of marriage had trained me to always respond, always smooth things over, always be the person who held it together so everyone else could fall apart. That woman would have called Jack back within the hour. That woman would have cried and forgiven and let someone else decide what happened next. That woman was dead. She just hadn't been buried yet. I slept little, but I wasn't pacing anymore. I wasn't crying. Something had shifted inside me during those silent hours, like a bone resetting after a bad break. It hurt, but it was pointing in the right direction now. Grief had burned itself down to nothing, and what it left behind was a cold, clear thing I barely recognized. I replayed everything Jack had told me in the car. Not as a wife, not as a mother, as a witness. Fake death, stolen identity, hidden accounts, forged documents, a purchased body, a family built on erasure. This wasn't betrayal in the way people usually mean it, tears and apologies and couples therapy. This was a crime. Multiple crimes. And every person involved had assumed that I was too old, too broken, and too loyal to ever figure it out. On the 4th morning, I woke up before dawn and knew exactly what I was going to do. I took a long shower. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made me feel like myself again, not the widow everyone pitied. When I looked in the mirror, the woman staring back was older, yes, but something behind her eyes had changed. She looked awake. She looked dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with violence and everything to do with clarity. I drove downtown to a building I had passed hundreds of times without noticing. 3rd floor, frosted glass door, a small sign with black lettering, private investigations. The man behind the desk was in his 60s, thinning hair, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He looked up when I walked in and studied me the way people study weather. Quietly, waiting to see which direction it was moving. "I need to find someone," I said, sitting down without waiting to be invited. He leaned back in his chair. "Is he missing or hiding?" "Hiding," I said. "And legally dead." That got his attention. He took off his glasses and set them on the desk. I told him everything. Not the emotions, not the decades of marriage, not the shape of grief. I gave him facts. The accident, the closed casket, the new name, the house, the woman, the children calling him Grandpa, the crooked finger and the scar no stranger could have. I showed him the photos from my phone. He listened without interrupting, which told me he was good at his job. When I finished, he nodded slowly. If what you're telling me is true, this goes well beyond infidelity. We're talking identity fraud, financial crimes, possibly insurance fraud. It'll take time. It'll cost money. I can pay, I said. I want proof. Bank records, property records, false documents, everything. Not suspected, proven. He named a price. I didn't flinch. I wrote the check on the spot and slid it across the desk. Over the next week, I became someone I didn't know I could be. I returned to the street with the pale green house at different hours. I wore hats, sunglasses, parked in different spots. I watched from a distance with the patience of someone who had spent 41 years waiting for a man who was never fully there. I learned his schedule. He left every morning at 8:15. He came home by 6. Weekends were for the children. Sundays he went to church with Susan, dressed in a button-down shirt, shaking hands with neighbors who knew him as James Carter, a kind widower who had moved to town a few years ago. A good man. A quiet man. I watched Susan touch his arm the way I used to. I watched him smile at her with the ease of a man who believed his past was sealed behind concrete and marble. He carried groceries the same way. He read the paper the same way. He stood on the porch in the morning and looked at the sky the same way. Everything he was doing with her, he had rehearsed with me first. I was the rough draft. She was the clean copy. The investigator called me 7 days later. "I have enough for a full report," he said. "You should come in." The folder he handed me was thick, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with paper. I opened it at his desk and read every page while he sat quietly across from me. A fake birth certificate, issued years after my husband was supposedly born. Bank accounts opened under the name James Carter, with nearly $2 million transferred in the months before the staged accident. Utility bills and tax records tying Richard to 2 separate households for over 20 years. Rent payments, school tuition for children I'd never met, medical records under the false name. A whole life, documented, maintained, funded with money that should have been ours. Then the last page, phone records, dozens of calls, long and regular, between Richard and Jack, before the accident, after the funeral. During every single month I thought I was alone. Jack hadn't just known. He had stayed involved. He had managed the transition. He had made sure the money moved cleanly. He had watched me shrink into a widow's silence and called it kindness. I closed the folder slowly. "Thank you," I said. The investigator watched me carefully. "Are you all right?" "I'm better than I've been in 6 months," I told him. And I meant it. That afternoon I made an appointment with an attorney. Not the kind who handles wills or real estate closings. I needed someone who understood fraud, financial crimes, conspiracy, identity theft. The woman I found came recommended by the investigator. Her office was clean and sparse, nothing on the walls except her degree and a framed quote I didn't stop to read. She was direct. No small talk. No sympathy face. She opened the folder I brought, read for 15 minutes without speaking, then looked up at me. "What you're describing is a criminal conspiracy," she said. "Your husband committed identity fraud, financial theft, and insurance fraud. Your son aided, facilitated, and directly benefited. You are entitled to full restitution, and there is strong legal ground for criminal charges against both of them." I felt a strange calm listening to her. Not peace, readiness. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "A confession would strengthen everything," she said, "particularly from your son. He's the weaker link. He's emotionally connected to you, and he believes you've accepted the situation. If he talks freely about the details, the timeline, the money, that testimony, combined with the documentary evidence, makes the case nearly impossible to defend. I already knew where to find additional proof. Jack kept a private office at the Marina Supply Warehouse. Years ago, He'd given me a spare key for emergencies. I'd never used it. It had sat in my kitchen drawer for so long I'd forgotten which key ring it was on. I found it that night, small and silver, tucked behind a flashlight and a roll of tape. But first, I needed him to talk. Not with suspicion pressing down on him. Not with his guard up. I needed him comfortable, relieved, convinced that his mother had processed the shock and was ready to move forward. I needed him to believe the worst was over. I called him the next afternoon. He answered on the first ring. "Mom, are you okay? I've been so worried." I let my voice soften. "I'm tired, Jack. I don't want to fight anymore. I just need to understand everything so I can move forward." There was relief in his exhale, quick and unguarded. "Of course, Mom. Anything you want to know?" "Let's have lunch tomorrow," I said. "Somewhere quiet. Just us." He agreed without hesitation. That night, I placed a small digital recorder in my purse. I tested it twice, checking the volume, the clarity. I practiced keeping my hands still and my face neutral. I rehearsed my questions until they sounded like a grieving mother trying to find peace, not a woman building a case. We met at a restaurant near the waterfront. Jack looked relieved to see me. He hugged me longer than usual. He pulled out my chair. He ordered my favorite tea without asking. All the gestures of a loving son, performed with the fluency of a man who had been performing for years. I let him talk. I asked when the plan started, how the money was moved, who signed what, where the proceeds from the business sales had gone, how Richard had found the man who died in his place, how much he paid the niece, who handled the documents, what name was on the life insurance policy, whether Richard had contacted anyone else. Each answer came easily now, flowing out of him with the confidence of someone who believed he was speaking to the safest person in the world. He told me about the offshore transfers, the shell company Richard had set up 3 years before the accident, the forged power of attorney that let Jack liquidate assets without my signature. He told me about the life insurance payout, split between a trust Jack controlled and an account Richard accessed under his new name. He didn't notice the recorder. He didn't notice that every word was another nail. While we sat there eating, my attorney and the investigator were already at work. With the evidence I had provided, they had secured emergency access to financial records through the court. The transactions confirmed everything Jack was telling me and more. Forged signatures on property transfers, unauthorized sales of jointly held assets, wire transfers to accounts I'd never known existed. A paper trail that stretched back more than 2 decades, neat and deliberate, like a second marriage license written in invisible ink. By the time lunch ended and Jack hugged me goodbye in the parking lot, telling me he loved me, telling me everything was going to be okay now, the trap had already closed. That afternoon, my attorney filed the criminal complaint with the district attorney's office. Fraud, forgery, financial exploitation of a spouse, identity theft, conspiracy. She called me 2 hours later. "The case has been accepted," she said. "Warrants are being prepared." I sat alone in my living room after that call. The house was quiet. No television, no music. Just the ticking of the clock on the mantle, the one Richard had bought at an antique shop on our 20th anniversary. He'd said it reminded him that time was precious. I used to love that story. Now the ticking sounded like something counting down. I thought about the woman I had been 6 months ago, crying into an empty pillow, talking to a dead man in the dark, begging God to give me one more day with him, just one. That woman would not have survived this moment. She would have crumbled. She would have forgiven. She would have let Jack explain it away and spent the rest of her life pretending she didn't know. But I wasn't her anymore. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt resolved, the way a door feels when it finally shuts, flush against the frame after years of sticking. The first call came at dawn. It wasn't Jack. It was my attorney. "They've issued the warrants," she said. Your son was taken into custody early this morning. No resistance. I closed my eyes and let the words settle into my body. Somewhere across the city, Jack was being handcuffed, read his rights, led to a car in front of neighbors who had watched him grow up, who had seen him mow my lawn on Saturdays, who had told me what a good son I had. The weight of that image didn't feel like victory. It felt like gravity, like something that had always been true, finally being allowed to fall. An hour later, my phone started ringing. Jack, over and over. I didn't answer. Then a message from his wife. Short, shaking. What did you do? I set the phone face down on the counter and made coffee. I drank it standing by the window, watching the morning light move across the yard Richard used to mow barefoot, complaining about the neighbor's fence. By noon, the news had spread through the family. Cousins, old friends, people who had stood beside me at the funeral and held my hands and told me I was the strongest woman they knew. Now they were calling to ask questions they didn't really want answered. I ignored them all. Their shock was real, but it wasn't mine to manage. Not anymore. At 2 p.m, my attorney called again. There's something else, she said. The identity he's been using, James Carter, it's being formally invalidated. The accounts under that name have been frozen. He has nowhere to hide. That was the moment I knew I needed to see him. Not to argue, not to explain, not to hear excuses, to end it. I drove back to the quiet street with the pale green house. I parked directly in front this time. I didn't hide. I didn't sit in the car watching from a distance. I walked up the path, past the white picket fence, past the wind chimes turning slowly in the breeze, and rang the bell. Susan opened the door. She looked at me with the cautious politeness people reserve for strangers. Can I help you? I'm here to see Daniel, I said. It's urgent. She hesitated, then nodded. He's out back. She stepped aside to let me through. The house was small, clean, lived in. Family photos on the walls, children's drawings on the refrigerator, the smell of something cooking. A life that looked ordinary from every angle. He was standing near the back fence, tools in his hands, sleeves rolled up. For a moment, he didn't see me. He was tightening a bolt on a gate hinge, his back to the house, the afternoon sun warming his shoulders. He looked peaceful, settled, like a man who had found exactly where he wanted to be. Then he turned. The recognition was instant, not the rehearsed confusion from the grocery store. This time his face opened like a wound. He knew there was no point pretending anymore. "Margaret," he whispered. I held out the envelope. "These are legal documents," I said. "You need to read them." His hands trembled as he took the papers. His eyes moved quickly across the pages, scanning, then slowing, then stopping. I watched the color drain from his face the way water drains from a sink, fast and irreversible. "What is this?" he asked. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said. "I told the truth. That's all." He looked past me toward the house. "Does she know?" I raised my voice just enough to carry. "She knows now." Susan appeared in the doorway behind me. Her face had changed. The cautious politeness was gone, replaced by something sharper, confusion sliding into alarm. "What's going on?" she asked. "Who is this woman?" Richard didn't answer. He stood there holding the papers, frozen, the mask he had worn for 20 years cracking apart in real time. "I'm his wife," I said, turning to face her. "His legal wife. We were married for 41 years. The man you know as James Carter doesn't exist. He never existed. His real name is Richard, and 6 months ago, he faked his own death so he could be with you without losing a cent." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard. Susan stared at him. Her lips moved, but no words came. Then quietly, almost gently, she asked the only question that mattered. "Is this true?" He closed his eyes. He didn't nod. He didn't deny it. He just stood there, holding the broken pieces of 2 lives in his hands, saying nothing. Susan stepped back. "You told me you were widowed," she whispered. "You said you had no one. You said you'd been alone for years." "He had someone," I said. "Me. I was there the entire time." Richard dropped to his knees on the concrete. The papers scattered around him. "Margaret, please," he said, his voice cracking. "I can explain. Just let me explain." "No," I said. "You've explained enough. You chose this. Every day for 20 years you chose deception. You chose theft. You chose to erase me. And you chose to turn our son into your accomplice." Faintly, in the distance, I heard sirens. "They're coming," he said. His voice was barely audible. "Yes." He looked up at me. For a second I saw the man I had married. Not the liar, not the schemer. The young man who had held my hand at our wedding and sworn he would love me until the day he died. That man had been real once, a long time ago. But he had chosen to kill himself long before any staged accident. "Margaret," he called after me as I turned to leave. "For the years we shared, for what we were." I stopped, but I didn't turn around. "What we were was real to me," I said. "That's exactly why you'll never understand what you destroyed." I walked down the path and through the gate. Behind me, the sirens grew louder. I heard car doors opening. I heard voices, official and calm. I didn't look back. I got into my car, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb as the flashing lights filled my rearview mirror. Richard died 3 weeks later. Not in a courtroom. Not in handcuffs. He suffered a heart attack in the holding facility while awaiting formal charges. The call came early in the morning, procedural and brief, as if someone were notifying me of a canceled appointment. "He passed at 5:20 a.m., the voice said. "You're listed as next of kin." I held the phone for a long moment without speaking. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel grief. What I felt was distance, vast and quiet, as if the man they were describing had stopped being part of my life long before his heart stopped beating. "Cremate him," I said. "Scatter the ashes at sea. No service." There was a pause. "Are you certain?" "Yes. He already took enough from me." He wasn't taking one more performance. The legal process moved forward without him. The false identity was formally dissolved. Frozen accounts were unlocked and audited. Assets that had been hidden, transferred, or sold under forged authority were recovered by the court and returned to their rightful owner. What Richard had stolen over 20 years, the system took back in weeks. Jack accepted a plea deal. He was sentenced to prison for financial fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Not a lifetime, but long enough to sit with what he had done. Long enough to understand that love does not cancel consequence. We spoke once after the sentencing. It was not forgiveness. I wasn't sure I had that in me anymore, and I wasn't sure he deserved it yet. But it was something. "I love you," I told him through the glass. But love doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't undo a single night I spent alone talking to a man you knew wasn't dead. It doesn't give me back the 6 months you stole, and it doesn't make what you did kind, no matter how many times you tell yourself it was. He nodded. For the first time since all of this began, he didn't argue. He didn't explain. He just sat there with the full weight of it. And I think that was the first honest thing he had done in years. Months passed. The house changed around me. I repainted the bedroom. I took down the photos that no longer told the truth and replaced them with ones that did. My sister's children. A sunset I photographed on a trip to the coast. A picture of me at 20, smiling at someone behind the camera I could no longer remember. I didn't erase Richard from every surface. I just stopped letting his memory fill every room. I traveled with friends I had neglected for years. I signed up for a ceramics class that met on Tuesday mornings. I planted a garden in the backyard, something I'd wanted to do for a decade but never had because Richard said the soil was wrong. The soil was fine. I slept through the night. I laughed without guilt. I ate dinner alone without feeling like the silence was punishing me. The loneliness didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It stopped being an absence and started being a space. My space. One afternoon in late autumn, I drove to the cemetery. I hadn't been back since the funeral. I stood in front of the headstone that bore my husband's name, carved into marble above 2 dates that didn't belong to him. Beneath that stone lay a stranger, a man who had been sick and alone and desperate enough to sell his own death to someone who needed it. I didn't cry. I didn't pray. I stood there for a few minutes, letting the wind pull at my coat. And then I said something I hadn't planned. "I'm sorry you're here," I said quietly. "I'm sorry no one mourned you as yourself." That grave didn't hold my husband. It held the last lie he ever told. And somewhere beneath it, it held my innocence too. The version of me who believed that loyalty was always returned, that love was always honest, that the man sleeping beside her was always truly there. I left without looking back. Today, my life is quieter. Smaller in some ways. Stronger in all the ways that count. I no longer confuse loyalty with disappearing. I no longer believe that keeping the peace means keeping silent. I no longer think love is supposed to cost you everything while the other person pays nothing at all. I learned that dignity isn't something a marriage gives you. It isn't something a husband grants or a son protects. It's something you claim the moment you refuse to be lied to any longer. And I learned that even after decades of deception, even after grief turns out to be a stage set someone else built around you, even after the people you trusted most turn out to be the ones holding the curtain, it is never too late to step out from behind it. They thought I would mourn forever. They thought my silence was surrender. They thought I was too old, too tired, and too broken to see what was right in front of me. They were wrong. What would you do in this situation? Be honest. Or did this remind you of someone? Tell me in the comments. And if this made you think about your own relationship, I left something in the description that can help you build something stronger. Subscribe if you want more stories like this every day, and share this with someone who needs to hear this story.